Welcome and thank you for joining us for the Publishing Now Fall 2024 Strategies for Success in International Markets, co-hosted by Westchester Publishing Services and Publishers Weekly. My name is Nicole Tomasi, and I'm the Marketing and Conference Manager here at Westchester Publishing Services. And before I turn it over to the excellent panel that we have pulled together today for the session, I just want to cover a few general items. First being that your microphones are going to be muted throughout the session. However, if you do have questions for the panelists, please enter those in the Q&A box that's located in the control bar at the bottom of your screen. We received a lot of excellent questions from you during the registration process, so we will cover as many of those as we can within the panelist segments and in the Q&A that will immediately follow. But of course, please enter any questions as they come to you, and we will answer what we can in the time that we have. For those of you who may not be familiar with Westchester Publishing Services, a little background about us. We're a U.S. employee-owned company that was founded 55 years ago in 1969, and present day we have global offices located in the United States, the United Kingdom, and India. We presently serve more than 600 publishers around the world who come to us for high-quality editorial, production, and digital conversion services on over 16,000 publications each year. And in addition to that, we have an education division that works further upstream with education publishers and ed tech companies, providing them with content development, design, and production services. So with that all taken care of, I am pleased to introduce your moderator for today's session, who is Jim Milliot, the editor-at-large at Publishers Weekly. Jim?
Thanks, Nicole. Good to be back as moderating the newest webinar with Westchester Publishing Services. As Nicole said, we've been doing this for about 4 years together. And we picked this topic because, as everybody I'm sure is quite aware, the domestic market hasn't necessarily been dynamic in the last few years, although there are signs that this year things are picking up. So that's good. But nonetheless, I'm sure everybody's looking for new places where they can sell their books. Before I turn it over to our panelists, just going to mention a few things that came up with the Frankfurt Book Fair that put today's discussion in some kind of context. Nielsen Book Data and CFG Entertainment did a report that covered the first 8 months of sales in 16 countries. And what they found was actually eerily similar to what's been happening in the United States. And that is that adult fiction is up, adult nonfiction is down, and children and young adults is up a little bit. And the reasons are also pretty similar to what's impacted the market here, in that the fiction is being, benefiting from TikTok and all the other social media platforms, while the international adult nonfiction market faced difficult comparisons from last year when Prince Harry's Spare was a real bestseller. So with that context, I gave us a few numbers, and I'll just briefly read them off, and then we can move on to the entertainment portion. Report says that Spanish and Portuguese-speaking book markets did especially well so far this year. Mexico was up 16%, Spain 12%, Brazil 9.5%, Portugal 9%, and India was also about 18%. While the more mature, bigger markets, things are not quite so good. France and the UK were down both about 1%, and Italy was flat. So they have a little bit of an idea of what the financial outlook or financial picture is in some of these bigger markets. And another thing that came up at Frankfurt was the growing popularity of English books in some European countries. And while this may seem a good thing for American publishers, there's quite a bit of concern about how this could affect the translation market. And I am sure we're going to hear about that from our panel in a minute. And speaking of our panel, I'm going to follow our standard process, and I will introduce or give quick background to everybody up front. And then when we dive into things, we'll just roll from from one to another. And okay, so you see who we have upcoming. Inez is, as it says, the managing director of Abrams and Chronicle Books Limited. For those of you who may not know exactly what that is, they work together and the sales and distribution arm for both Chronicle and Abrams in various markets. And they also sell for their distribution clients. Before joining Abrams and Chronicle Books, Inez had over 20 years of experience in the UK market. Christie Henry is director of Princeton University Press. During her tenure, they've added an audio imprint, a speakers agency, a creative lab, and a website. I think probably the most interesting for our presentation today is the press has also expanded into China with representation to other publishers in China. So I think we'll be hearing something about that. Dan Vidra, publishing consultant, has a deep background in international sales. He's been with 2 of the big 5. He was the international sales director at Simon & Schuster and HarperCollins. Got caught up in the startup frenzy and was working for Texture there for a little while. Now he's offering consulting services to independent publishers. And Dan had also been the chairman of the AAP International Committee. And Cecilia de la Campa, we needed an agent. We couldn't think of anybody better. She's Executive VP, Global Marketing Licensing for Writers House. And in that role, she leads the licensing team, oversees international sales, translation deals, and new business initiatives focused on emerging technologies and the future content creation. So, having done my part, I'm turning this over to Inez.
Thank you so much, Jim. Lovely to meet everybody. Thank you for having me on the panel. I really appreciate it. So yeah, just a little bit about who Abrams and Chronicle Books are, because I think most of you will know who Abrams are and who Chronicle Books are. And both companies recognise the need for a dedicated team in the local UK market in order to sell their books and market them more effectively. So about 15 years ago, they joined forces. They created Abrams and Chronicle Books, and we sell their titles into the UK and export markets. So our entire time is basically spent selling American books to the UK and European areas. We don't do any local publishing, so our focus is purely on sales, which is really exciting. And I think not everybody obviously can do this. Not everyone can create their own sales force, but I hope that there's some information I can give you here that might be useful for you and some things that we've learned along the way. It's been 15 years and we've had great success every single year, which is great. So what's the market worth to you, I think, is the first question. I think thinking about what that might be, it's, anyone's guess, but in reality, about 10% of your sales could be in the UK and export markets. And that rises if you're looking at the gift areas, entertainment, popular culture, comic books, graphic novels, that could be more like 30%, which is quite significant when it comes to some of the books published in the US market. Obviously, depending on the books or the lists that you have, it's different, but we see great success. And every now and again, there's a very UK-centric title that our parent publishers publish that will do a lot more than that, which is also very exciting. We also represent other client publishers too. But our main job is to take American books and publish them into the UK market. Now, some of the challenges we face is that we need to overcome the perception that these are American books published for the American market, because, Waterstones, we love them, but they can be a little bit reticent when it comes to what they consider American books. Now, overcoming that, I think there's a few things you can think about there. Number one is timing. Timing on 2 counts, publication date being the most obvious. Right now, I'm not plugging a book, I promise, but Sky Shade, this is published today in the US and also today in the UK. Now, normally in the UK, we publish on a Thursday, and that works really well because it works with the flow of distribution and the buying patterns. But every now and again, when you have a global TikTok, especially book, you want to publish at exactly the same time because those audiences want the books now. They don't care about the US or the UK, they just want their favorite author immediately. Now, that's not always possible, I know, and sometimes you have to publish, maybe a month or 2 months out, and that's fine too. That works because if you're printing in the US and sending books in, you need a bit of extra time. But beyond that, the longer you leave it, the longer it becomes harder. There's more bleed into the market. It's harder to get the books out there and really market them. So I would say think about publication. The other piece of information I would say is on timing, is planning. Think about your UK and European markets like immediately. The minute you start thinking about buying a book or even you know, coming up with the concept yourself, you've got to think about the UK and European markets right from the start. Lots of reason for this, not least because it's helpful for you. But things like the cover and the title. Now, think about the history of publishing. I know there was a long time ago when every cover had to be completely different for the UK and US market, the bane of everyone's life, I think. That's changed. You know, there's been, look at TikTok, they want to have the same cover everywhere. Literary fiction probably still has some sensibilities where perhaps they do like slightly different covers. And certainly when it comes to interiors, social media has helped us so much. Instagram, Pinterest has meant there's been this kind of a homogenization of style so that, you know, a book no longer looks American. It looks like it's for the world. So it's brilliant. We don't have to have different covers. Sometimes we do. Cookery, by the way, is the big exception for some reason. Sensibilities on cookery in the UK and the US, completely different. Don't know why. It's not, you know, there are exceptions to the rule. We do very well with books like Tartine, but we haven't changed those covers. They work nicely, but you will notice that cookery doesn't do as well if you keep the same covers. But this is something you can think about early on and make a decision whether you do or don't change. Titles, there was a time when we would, in the UK, change American titles because they were too American. I think the Bridges of Madison County had a different title originally. They quickly changed that back. But that's less so now, Harry Potter being the example of obviously Sorcerer's Stone, Philosopher's Stone. But in general, you don't need to change the title. But now and again, we get a bit twitchy in the UK about the words colour, neighbour, flavour. We don't like that missing you. It's odd for us. So I would say on the adult side, that's getting less and less. We're less sensitive about that these days, but it's just worth bearing in mind. On the children's side, it is more important though. People really do want to sort of educate their children properly. I put that in brackets because obviously it depends where you are, but they prefer to have colour with the U and make it all nice for kids. Oh, and the one thing you cannot do in the UK, the word mom with the O, we just don't do that. That's the one thing that will flag your book as very, very American. But there are ways around these things. So planning early means you can look at these different things and think about different ways to go there. But in general, I think we are so much more global as an industry, and that really is fantastic and makes our lives easier, especially when it comes to print runs, because isn't it easier to do one big print run than two separate ones? Anyway, so timing, definitely important. Covers and titles, think about that. What else can I say? Publicity and marketing. I think you don't necessarily need to have an expensive consultant in the market. Sometimes you do, obviously, for certain titles. But again, if you think about this early on, you make sure your authors are primed to mention the UK market or Europe, or just to even start helping build those pre-orders, making sure that the book is on Amazon in time, that when your author's talking about the book or launching the book, that they're thinking about the UK market and getting excited and talking about it. Because if you build pre-orders on Amazon or Waterstones, they will start listening, they will start ordering more early on. So definitely think about the UK and export markets sooner rather than later. Obviously, social media is the huge one when it comes to marketing your titles, and sometimes you will need someone in the UK to help you navigate the publicity and marketing, but it doesn't have to be for every single book. You can work that one out. There are different ways of dealing with things. The market as a whole in the UK, it's a lot more here than just bookstores. Same in the US, of course. And that kind of leads me on to talking about trends. So coming back to what I was saying earlier about there being a homogenization of style across the globe, that comes with trends too. I mean, I can't explain why there's a trend for books on mushrooms that do so well for us, but they do well for us. They do well in the US. I don't know why. But we're more aligned than we've ever been, which is brilliant, and we can all take advantage of that. Look, I could talk, when it comes to trends, I could talk about the pandemic boom, where we saw self-help and positivity and self-care doing really well. I could talk about how that's kind of gone away and the darker side is coming through. We're seeing myths, legends, lady poisoners, cynicism. Good example of cynicism. I mean, the UK, we're known for being cynical, but disappointing affirmations, one of my favorites. It's done amazingly well in the US, huge in the UK. There's been a real trend to the more cynical, darker market. I could talk about the fact that poetry's on the rise, that children's is sort of a bit flat right now. There's lots of things we can talk about. These things are cyclical. We talk about these things all the time. We understand that trends come and go. But there's one trend that I don't think we talk about enough in publishing, and that is the book as the object. One of the biggest trends we are seeing, is that the physical object of a book is becoming so important to us. You only have to scroll through Instagram, and it's my favorite trick. There's a book behind me called Live Beautiful. You spend 5 minutes on Instagram, you could probably find that book in about 80 different images somewhere with a candle on top. Every book has to have a candle on top. I don't advocate mixing fire and paper, by the way, but the book as the object is becoming really, really important in the market. And we see that from the buyers. We see buyers saying, I want pink books, I want green books, I want books that are going to look nice, merchandise next to my candles or my, I don't know, bath salts. And this is becoming really big. And the consumers are looking for this too. They want the beautiful object that they might never read it. I don't care as long as they're buying it. They might just want it on their coffee table. So I think there's been some questions about print on demand, and that's a brilliant, brilliant resource, so useful. But I think when it comes to that market, it doesn't cut the mustard yet. We can't have those beautiful finishes, and they are so important. And the consumers are becoming much, much more savvy about that area of the market and what a book looks like and what it feels like. Sorry, I could talk about finishes forever. Head and tail bands, end papers, it's my absolute favorite subject. But yeah, people are buying books for what they look like and how they look in their house and how they can merchandise them at home. And that's a huge market for us. And that's a real growing trend that we're seeing. And look, we often have this debate in publishing, don't we? Is it, will the digital books take over the physical? The answer is no. There's a brilliant market for digital. I mean, we all know this. It's fantastic. It's a great resource. You can publish something with no overheads. You can get it out in the market direct from where you are in the US. You can make really good money from that. But what you won't do is expand your market. You won't have that discoverability. So it serves a purpose. And like I said earlier, we can't talk about publishing as one thing. It's many genres and specialisms. So I talk really mainly about lifestyle entertainment books, things that do well for us. So yeah, digital has its place, low overheads, lots of return on investment. It's kind of the dream. But there are books where they need to be physical, and there's a huge market out there. And I think, again, as long as you choose wisely, you can sort of work with that and do some really exciting things in the UK and export markets there. So production values are key, definitely. So I would say our industry is in amazing shape at the moment. So many global opportunities, more than we've ever seen. So many routes to market that we've not seen before. Lots of new non-traditional sales channels that we can take advantage of. But I think if there's one thing you take away from what I'm talking about today, it will definitely be timing, and think about the UK market and the European market as much as you can as early on in the publishing process. It shouldn't be an afterthought or a bolt-on. The fact that you're in this presentation listening to us talk about that means you've already taken the first step, which I think is very important. But yeah, just put some thought, time and planning into your strategy, and you will have some really strong successes. And like I said, there are lots of routes to market, lots of different ways of doing things. So yeah, that's me. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I didn't go over time, and I do speak very quickly, so I hope you got something vaguely useful out of that. And it was nice to meet everybody.
That was great, Inez. Now, Christie, what's the worldview from Princeton?
Thanks so much, Jim, and Nicole, for organizing us, for all of you for joining us. It's so nice to have a chance to sit in conversation with Inez and Dan and Cecilia. We're also experiencing our mushroom moments and our cynicism and maybe a little bit of grief thrown in there too, and hope on the other end of all of it. This also happens to be University Press Week, and the theme of the week this year is Stand Up, with so many forces to stand up against. I hope some of you will also take some time and occasion to take in some of the AU Press's collaborative programming this week. At PUP, international markets are essential to both our mission as an independent nonprofit scholarly publisher and to our impact in all forms. The markets represent a material amount of our annual sales revenue in all book formats, print, and audio. And this is in addition to substantial rights licensing that has been a constant at PUP. We want to absolutely make sure our identity as a global publisher is matched by actions and investments that demonstrate that authentically and consistently. So we think globally about authors, we support editors in international travel and commissioning, we seek global IP rights, we engage international peer reviewers, we think about cover designs that work globally, as Inez was just speaking about, with global pricing, synchronized publication dates that work particularly well with this increasingly synchronized global publicity, and more. It doesn't mean we don't act and engage locally. We recognize that there are unique markets and readership sensibilities throughout the world, and I think that's the balance that we all strive for. It's not always easy. When it works, it's a wonderful thing. Our international investments center in two areas. They're people and partnerships. I guess that's like much of our publishing centers on the people and partnerships, but I wanted partnerships to be a real theme for those of you who are just thinking about growing internationally. We have structured PUP to support global collaborations with intention. We have 3 global offices in Oxford, Princeton, and Beijing. I'm going to talk a little bit more about China subsequent to this. And we're a staff choice remote organization. Nearly half of our team opts to work remotely. And that allows us actually wonderfully to be in many more locations in the world, from Barcelona to Brazil. Our reporting lines on the team cross geographic lines, from acquisitions to promotions to sales and digital and audio and international rights. So we create a people structure that's designed to forebrain the global, while again also appreciating local communities. For managing a remote staff, I know that that was one of the questions that you brought today. We offer a great deal of training to managers, which is one of the key early tools, create multiple opportunities for the teams to connect. And we've evolved communication tools and guidelines, abilities to really access information without a lot of friction, which I also think is critically important in working globally. And also recognizing that there are many more costs involved in maintaining global organizations with remote components. I firmly believe the investment is well worth it for the flexibility and individual agency, and also I think for the opportunities it gives us internationally. With partnerships being so vital to the global ambition, a number of you asked about where to start, and my recommendation is looking for partners as a first step. There are so many established consortia and relationships that you can tap into. We have sales partnerships, the University Press Group, which we share with University of California Press in Columbia, and there are a number of other sales consortiums. We have sales and marketing distribution partnerships with New South in Australia and New Zealand, sales and marketing in an EPZ program in India with Penguin Random House. Independent booksellers are, of course, our partners throughout the world, and perhaps our best peer reviewers for what they select for their stores gives us the most incredible feedback on our publishing decisions. And libraries are another critical constituency and partnership, and we rely on a range of other aggregator partners internationally to help ensure that our books end up in those collections, from De Gruyter, JSTOR, Project Muse, Erasmus. Our audio imprint, Princeton Audio, is enjoying the lift of Spotify in the audiobook market globally, and also relies on a new partnership with Bookwire for distribution, so again, on this theme. And our website, we've been increasing direct-to-consumer sales, another trend internationally and domestically for us. And we have worked and partnered with Glassbox for our shopping cart and first-line customer service. And then subsequent to that, the distribution partners, Ingram and Wiley, and also working with POD partners. We very much believe in book as object and all those wonderful finishes and design. The craft of bookmaking is very much alive here. But as part of our global ambitions, we've recognized the need to bring book publication closer to market for speed of timing. And a lot of books work very well in POD programs, working with Sheridan CPI, Global Connect, CNPIEC, the China National Publications Import and Export. A great deal of our people and partnership time both is being spent now on several areas impacting international markets, which I think we'll also talk more about. For ebooks, the focus is on accessibility compliance, including remediation on backlist, what we consider our long life IP. We keep an update on this on our website. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We're starting the remediation with the books that are of the greatest reach, thinking textbooks and the impact that they have on students. And we're also using another partner, Virtue Sales, our database, to document the inordinate financial burden which remediation would cause for some of us, which is part of the compliance. We also work with the Benetech accredited vendors for all of our ebook conversions, another really important partnership in that area. For print books, which are still for us the majority of our annual revenue, the focus is on distribution and POD being a critical part of that, and sustainability being significantly added to that for both compliance and also ethical reasons. We're members of BookChain for sustainability guidance and operations. And we are also sharing our actions with the newly launched 1,000 Actions campaign of the International Publishers Association. There was a lot about that at the Frankfurt Book Fair. That's in support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the campaign of 1 million actions for our common future. I hope many of you are thinking about that as well. We actually have also a wonderful publishing fellow right now who's helping propel that forward and started a new newsletter, Sustainability. There are 2 international initiatives in particular I wanted to highlight today, and I want to also thank PW for covering both when we launched them. The first is a partnership with Planeta. We've long been licensing partners with Planeta for translations to and from Spanish, but we've now launched a sort of international program in a domestic territory, which is coincident Spanish and English publication with Planeta US. We started it with a history of Puerto Rico this spring, where they were published. We published the English edition, Planeta published the Spanish in the US initially, and then we're radiating out from there. And those, we synchronized publicity, we synchronized launch events, wonderful new way to sort of acknowledge English as an additional language and the importance of that in our territory, our US territory. And we've just announced the second book in that series, The Ancient Maya, A New History, which we announced at Frankfurt. It really highlights the synergies when you work with partners and think globally and locally at once. It also supports our global goals of further engaging with the Latin American market. And we heard Jim mention that both Mexico and Brazil are up. Our team will be attending the Guadalajara Book Fair. For those of you just getting into these relations, book fairs are just a vibrant moment. They have rebounded wonderfully after the pandemic. Took a little bit of time, but it's a great way to engage and learn in really efficient ways. And if you have time in December, the Guadalajara Book Fair is coming up, and it's programmed to be back-to-back with International Publishers Congress, which has a wonderful program on copyright, freedoms to publish, sustainability, AI, and a whole lot of humanity. The second initiative I wanted to quickly talk about is one that we launched at the Beijing Book Fair in June. We have been expanding our China initiative as part of our global commitment, and working with CNPIAC, who I mentioned is one of our POD partners. We've opened an online bookshop, and it's propelled really by the POD availability of titles. So our operations team has been working tenaciously to get more titles to China National so that they can go to market quickly and be featured on this online bookshop. We opened our Beijing office in 2017. And initially, we focused on the institutional market, which had significant engagement with English language scholarly works. We also represent the University of Chicago Press in China and are in conversations with a number of other publishers. The pandemic for us prompted, necessitated, created an opportunity to shift from institutional to retail in China, and that's been a really consistent growth area for us since. I know Dan's going to speak a little bit more about that, but the retail has grown in such a way that we've decided to expand our sales team so that we can invest equally in both institutional and retail, supported by active social media on WeChat. Social media, I think, remains a real propeller around the world. That's one of those other consistent global themes. We also like to think about international ambitions in a reciprocal way, much like translations are reciprocal, building bridges. And we launched a new lecture series with Peking University designed to bring lectures that are generally interested into book form that, again, we'll publish in English and then find translators to publish in China. There was a question also about translations and engaging, and I know Cecilia is going to talk more about that as well. But for this particular lecture series, we're working with another partner, academic language experts who help with manuscript preparation. And I would also highly recommend to any of you to engage with Worlds Without Borders, which is one of the best groups building bridges between readers and writers through translations. And I'm more than glad to follow up with any of you offline about any of these. And again, thanks for being a part of this today. And over to Dan. Oh, Jim.
Thanks, Christie. Very informative. Dan, your turn.
Hi, everyone. I am going to speak specifically from an export of U.S. books point of view. So this is possibly a little bit more narrow than Christie's perspective. I'll just talk about China and Europe, and then a few questions that seem to kind of touch about the export market in general. For China, from a trade publisher's point of view, there was tremendous growth, and probably with a peak of around 2018, and then it dropped off. It dropped off before COVID. And the market specifically is largely early readers and middle grade readers with a cliff right around young adult. And the sales are virtually all through the online channels. And it's specifically parents who are trying to familiarize their kids with English. For the regular trade market, yes, it exists, and it's mostly business and self-improvement. It's, that's pretty much what it is, and it's also mostly all online. The macroeconomic climate in China has cooled. Publishers have been diversifying their supply chain away from printing a lot of books in China. There have been tariffs, and then in July 2021, there was a government-directed closure of for-profit sort of test cram schools that didn't really affect imported English language books, but it was sort of directionally not great. And that was with a view that basically affluent Chinese families could put their kids in these cram schools to have an advantage over less privileged kids, and that market's been taken away. The interesting thing about China historically has been the extraordinary, the interesting, innovative biz dev ideas that have come out of China. And specifically, they're kind of like, we call them mixed rights projects, which combine ebook and digital audio as well as print. An example, here's a little show and tell. This is a hungry caterpillar, and this is something called a talking pen, say pen, and you can sort of read the dot-coded lines on a book, and then you can hear the English language translation. So there are different things like that. There are different things like people will come to you wanting streaming audio rights to be listened to via QR codes. And the thing is, if you're a publisher, do you have these rights to grant? So there's the export of print rights. And then if you want to license or digital audio or like animation, I mean, Cecilia could probably go into this, but there's like an unbelievable permutation of possible rights combinations for different products, largely learning English, kind of educational, kind of entertainment, that I just don't even know if there's the vocabulary for. So what you have to do is kind of like try and put a value on it, but the value is going to be minimal. And it's kind of like, generally looked at as a package, and you kind of possibly sell more print. It's in the service of selling more print units. And yeah, so for the import of English language books into China, there's about a half a dozen state authorized distributors. So the publisher does not work directly with the ultimate bookseller. So the distributors are kind of the soft layer of censorship. So to actually sell a bunch of books in China, it's very helpful to have a footprint there. PRH does, Scholastic does. And if you don't actually have an office there, it's very useful to have sales managers who are living there, like Hachette or Pam Macmillan, because everything within China is largely done on WeChat, largely done in Chinese language. So it's very, very difficult without those kind of resources to really get into the market. There were a few questions that kind of largely touched on export metadata. If you have great metadata domestically, it's going to be great metadata internationally. So there's no need to mess about with like, bespoke metadata streams or Onyx feeds for international accounts. If people in countries where people do not natively speak English are searching for a title and they're searching for an English language book, they will be searching with an English language word. So it kind of, just good quality metadata works all over the place. And a lot of international accounts are just going to use Core Source. They're going to use Gardner's. They're going to use Baker and Taylor. It's just kind of one-stop shopping. For different people who, smaller publishers who are not or do not believe that they're actively in the international markets right now, you might be. So if you are a publisher, you're distributed by Simon & Schuster in the US, you will be distributed internationally by Simon & Schuster. Smithsonian is distributed by PRH. PRH will be distributing you internationally. Andrews McMeels of Simon & Schuster. If you are with Ingram, you're going to be international. You're going to be internationally distributed by these guys, or you could be. They will get you broadly wherever books are sold, which is like the online channels. So like the low-hanging fruit will be there. For smaller or mid-sized publishers distributed by these types of organizations, will you be 100% happy? That's an open question. Your mileage will vary, but like they'll definitely, I mean, the low-hanging fruit will be caught. And if you do not have one of those arrangements, you might find yourself in all of the Amazon international channels right now. So Amazon, when we think of Amazon Europe is really a combination of Germany, France, Spain, Italy. There's a bunch of international Amazon marketplaces. We kind of roll them all up together into Amazon Europe. But if you search for your title will probably be for sale, and it will be for sale through a third party. Back in the day, one of these third parties was Book Depository. And Book Depository sold as like an affiliate seller on the Amazon marketplaces and elsewhere. And they were highly successful across the international landscape. They've gone away. Into that vacuum, a whole bunch of other organizations have stampeded to try to be that kind of a seller. And your sales through those third-party sellers internationally, they would probably be reflected in your Ingram sales, your Bookazine sales, your Baker and Taylor sales, or others. So despite, if you might well be passively selling internationally right now without really being able to see it. Ingram is like Ingram is an incredibly vital link into the international marketplaces. And for like global exposure, TikTok and Instagram, those guys are global. In the UK, if your books are in the UK as a US publisher, they could be there through either one of your partners. Like the edge case is PRH US. There had been a large distribution organization called Grantham, which was PRH UK's third-party client distribution facility. PRH UK said, we're going to close this. It doesn't make sense. So all of these UK publishers, like the Faber Alliance, had to find other homes in the UK to be distributed. And then PRH US said, not so fast, we'll keep that open. So if you are a Penguin Random House US distributed client, all of your books will be living at Grantham in the UK and can be distributed into Europe, specifically Amazon. And to actually get to Amazon in Europe, Amazon in March of 2023 changed their sourcing policy from the US. So in about a year and a half ago, Amazon Europe was all US publishers' largest account in Europe by orders of magnitude. Amazon said, we're going to try to bring our sourcing closer to locally, so we do not have a large carbon footprint. We can be environmentally friendly. And this has been really quite a shock for US publishers. This includes Ingram, and everybody's been trying to mitigate how to handle this. One of the ways to do this, and this is possibly Amazon's preferred path, put everything in POD. So you can either strike a bargain with Amazon POD, Ingram POD, and their partners, or there's some terrific local partners like Libri or Zeitfrat. We've kind of noted all books are not POD-able, even if you wanted to put them into POD. So for that, it's good to have books in the UK where they can be sourced. So there's Gardner's in the UK, there's Ingram in the UK, there's people like Turnaround in the UK. This can be done, but it doesn't fully mitigate the strategy. Worst case scenario, these books come in through affiliate sales. So even though Amazon Europe is not buying directly from the US, your books will probably be available there through third parties. And to get to English language books into Europe, which is where Cecilia is going to have a definite additional detail. Sure, there's been a huge flood of English language books into Europe. And the impact's been a lot of English language books in Europe. So there are two different types of English language books. There are American English language books and there are British English language books. There's been a lot of friction of importing things from the UK into Europe with Brexit, which still continues to this day, but it's still cheaper than bringing books in from the US. So when the kind of like concurrent with Amazon changing their buying patterns and like this, massive explosion of English language books in Europe, a lot of sales have moved directly to the UK. And like the way they come in from the UK, from UK publishers and US publishers, but also Gardner's. Gardner's has been an unbelievable pipeline into all of these booksellers, specifically online in Europe. So that is really, I mean, of the English language books in Europe, Gardner's is possibly the greatest, the greatest pipeline. And this has been driven largely, I think we've touched on this, through Instagram influencers, TikTok. It's been quite something. So this has put pressure. Well, it had always been the Netherlands, but then it expanded to Germany and Scandinavia. And when I was in Frankfurt, I'd heard that the new Sally Rooney, for a first week on sale in France, the English language edition sold more than the French language edition in France, which, I mean, that's kind of anecdata, but that is a shocking turn. And I think Cecilia, I mean, that was a lot. Cecilia can kind of go more into this from her point of view.
Okay, I think that's your cue, Cecilia, so take it away.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I've loved hearing the other panelists so far. I feel like this is such a great group. So before I get into that, Dan, thank you for the tee up. I just want to take a step back and kind of explain my role at Writers House. So for the context of this panel, I will very much be speaking from like the agency point of view, agents on behalf of authors, and also the licensing side of things, which can be translation, which is kind of this other piece that we haven't quite talked about in terms of success in the international markets. Christie touched on it, but it's not necessarily in opposition to international sales and English sales. They coexist. And we have to keep our eye on all of it, but I'll talk about the interplay between the two of them. But I do want to just, note some terminology stuff. I think it was Inez mentioned that the UK and global considerations that she's doing should not be an afterthought. And that is like our ethos. So we actually rebranded our entire department a couple years back to not just be the sub-rights department. That sounds so secondary. And so we call ourselves the Global Licensing and Media Department. These are business decisions that are being made at the forefront. It's why clients come to Writers House. We are talking about UK audio, LLM training. These are all licensing business decisions that are happening at the point of sale, point of initial deal to a US publisher, sometimes before. So all really important stuff and not secondary or subsidiary, right? So I think that's hopefully everyone here is a fan of international sales and will agree with that. And I think also a big part of what Christie was talking about too is finding the right partners. And I think that's why I love what I do and what we really hone in on. So one of the questions I saw was, is translation sales worth it? And the answer is like a resounding yes. The more you invest in these rights channels, and I know a lot of agencies don't have their own rights teams, their licensing teams, and publishers' rights teams are getting smaller or being subsumed by international sales teams. I think the more you invest in these channels, the more business there is to be done. You can find the right partners, you can find the people who know which publishers you're going to do business with, because it's not a sale one and done. It's a license. You need someone who you can rely on through the entire term about marketing, positioning, timing, reinvestment, repackaging, buying more titles in a series. These are all ongoing things that you need to be trusting them to manage on your behalf, trusting them to manage the license and the brand. So those are some really important, I think, basics for how we're doing our business and how I'd approach international sales or translation. And so going into some of the, big topics of the day, for sure, the English language exports, I think we've all said a lot about it. So I'll just dig in a little bit further about, we're like 2-3 years into the crisis. Like, we had some German publishers come to us with ultimatums asking us to really forensically analyze our UK income for certain huge authors against not their German sales, their European sales. So look at their German advance plus their Dutch advance plus their Scandinavian advances, and ask if we were willing to forgo the income for the authors across Europe, right, against a UK sale, which sounds crazy, but this is where the German publishers are at. So it really is sounding the alarm. I think that we found I think it's like actually settled a little bit from last Frankfurt, because people have been really open to having these conversations and experimenting. So that's where we're having all kinds of conversations with our UK partners, right? Like, we're doing UK deals to our dedicated partners as well. So we need to dig in with them about what those export royalties look like, and what their actual sales look like and discounts look like into the European market. And then there's also a lot of strategy to be done about timing, as we've talked about. So we have a lot of authors who maybe we can do a windowed, translation publication ahead of the US and UK publication to give them a bit of a head start. We're drilling down into which retailers in those specific markets are carrying which editions, and at what price point. One interesting thing that we've found is that it's not actually a race to the bottom. A lot of people were concerned about just a race to the bottom of the price point because the UK edition carries such a low export royalty, but also price. And it's not necessarily the case. I think, especially with these book as object special editions, we've found the local publishers have a lot of success with this gorgeous sprayed edges edition where fans will buy both the local edition and then the English edition. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I think just having the conversations and having it be specific to each author and their sales channels and markets is really important. So again, having someone who knows how to have those conversations is key. And then a big part of timing I'll mention too is not just when somebody can publish the translated edition, it's when you have the translatable manuscript available to give to the translator in those foreign countries. And so for some of our biggest authors, a lot of the US publishers are like on 7th, 8th pass, right? And then they're gonna publish the book. And we have invested in comparison software so that we can give German and Dutch publishers earlier versions of the translatable manuscript and make sure that they put in all those copy editing changes, or just building in a translation window so that those European partners can get a translatable manuscript with 4 or 5 months ahead of publication so that they can match the US and the UK date. It's really important. Another thing I want to mention is people have tried, it hasn't necessarily worked, but this whole non-exclusivity of English language rights. I know some Dutch publishers have tried that. Seems interesting. I'm all for experimentation. I don't think it's going to work for a number of reasons, especially just retailer confusion, price fixing laws, all of this. And really, I think these are all mitigating factors. The real thing we're looking at is going to be either accept there will be drastically reduced advances or no sales coming from these markets without a major shift or correction, and then really digging in with your partners to look at those export royalties so that we can make sure the author is participating in wherever the sales are coming from. So that's something that's a key initiative for us as we, talk to everybody about this. Okay, The other two things I wanted to mention, kind of big topics coming off of Frankfurt. One is obviously just digital streaming audio of it all. Terminology there is also like a big question mark, because a lot of the international countries use streaming and subscription interchangeably, and they're not. So I think that there's some learning going on there. One of the things I've always loved is that the international markets have such a healthy retailer marketplace in the for E and audio. They have multiple streamers and subscription services. They're not Audible heavy and now Spotify heavy. Although I do think it was interesting that Audible and Spotify had the most presence at Frankfurt in terms of signage. They were everywhere. But I do think that there's going to be a lot more discussion coming with just this audio boom and how that's going to happen internationally. I think one of our key things is really encouraging international publishers to invest in their own audio editions, so that they're not giving those rights away to the retailers. We found that that's been really key. And then also, I think we should all be keeping an eye on, there's like a lot of bulk backlist deals being done, especially AI driven for both the translation and then the narration. Obviously, authors feel really strongly about AI being used for those things. So we have to weigh the benefit of distribution versus the value of having it done the right way and with a bespoke partner, all of that. Not dissimilar to the export edition equation. And then I think also we should keep an eye on who owns narration, especially with some of these digital only deals. If you're doing a digital only deal, fine, it's just to get it up there and see. It's maybe something will pop, but probably that's going to be a 1 to 3 year license after they invest in the translation. Well, who owns that translation afterwards if it's proven to be successful? Why not have that live somewhere so that it can go alongside the rights if you're going to move the rights to a more traditional publisher? So I think that there will be some movement there. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was just on trends. We come after Frankfurt and we talk about all these business things, but people want to know, like, who is excited about what? Which books were people excited about? So I'll mention, I've mentioned some trends, but romantasy obviously is still the queen reigning genre. And I do very much believe that it's not a trend. I think it's just a wave, and it's really transformed fandom and readership and audience engagement with how they're finding content. So less about the trend. Obviously, book is object and have a lot of sprayed edges behind me. These are all really interesting things leading to like the merchification of fandom. So I think and you talked about this, Inez, but merch has risen very much alongside this specific romantasy genre boom. And so we've done a ton of stuff with the interplay of those rights and what it means. And fans are the ones creating the merch. And what does that mean? So I think that this is just a really interesting space with some takeaways from the rise of romantasy. So obviously the book is object. All of these subscription boxes, the subbies. So in the UK, there's Fairy Loot, Illumicrate, there's Owlcrate, tons of them. But in Germany, there's quite a few as well. Chest of Fandoms, Buchbessa. Italians have Pendragon, Dreamwheeler. The French have Cub. The Brazilians have Tag, right? These are huge. And they're blind boxes. So fans will buy the book or pre-order the book from the publisher and then get the special edition book in a box as well. And those boxes can have 30, 40,000 copies, right? Get it on the top of the bestseller list. So there's a lot of interesting rights questions with these subscription boxes. And that leads me into actually like what as a last takeaway, what I find is a really interesting shift, not just with book boxes is almost like a new retailer, but something I've seen in other industries and I've read about in other industries is like a larger retailer shift where affiliate marketing, especially online with e-commerce and e-tailing, has made way for affiliate sales, where like the actual influencers are a mini retailer in and of themselves, whether that be on TikTok Shop or, there's lots of, or Shopify, LinkMe, all of these things via social media. So I think that there's a lot of stuff there that we should, and publishers should be looking at in terms of how books are being sold. We've had a few examples where a book has popped or hit the bestseller list and the publisher didn't know why. And it was a TikTok shop, right? And it was being fulfilled by Ingram. And we had to find this random TikTok shop and be like, hey, glad you're a fan. Thanks. Like, what happened? And I do think we should look at, obviously, Douyin is the ByteDance owned Chinese version of TikTok. And they're very much the model for what TikTok Shop was going to be. And there we have influencers. Someone like Wen Fang can easily sell around 30,000 copies of one book title by holding it up for like 2 seconds in one streaming broadcast. She takes a 30% net sales commission, right? So like if she's the new retailer, what does that look like for the retailer fulfilling the sale? And then obviously the royalty to the author. So these are all really interesting questions. I think looking at this kind of like what the future of, who knows which social media platforms will even exist next year, but looking at influencers, podcasts, YouTube, all of this as a retail kind of revolution, I find really interesting.
Okay, well, this was the easiest panel I've ever had to moderate since I didn't really have to ask a question. Since we're almost out of time, I think, Nicole, I'm turning it over to you. I just like to thank everybody. I mean, it was really terrific presentations across the board. I know we'll have an article in Publishers Weekly in the next few weeks. You can look for that. So thank you all for attending. And Nicole, I think you closed this, right?
Yes, I do. And I just want to thank everybody for attending and thank you to our panelists for sharing a lot of excellent information. And I'm sorry that we didn't have time for questions, but I think the panelists covered it so well that we don't need to today. But I do ask, as you're exiting out, to let us know how we did by completing the 2-question survey that's going to come up as you exit out of the webinar. And as some of the panelists offered, if there's any questions that you have afterwards, or if you want to connect with the panelists to ask them more information, reach out to us and we'll try to facilitate those connections for you. So with that, I will wish you all a good rest of the day and thank you for joining us today.